Welcome, everyone. It's our Monday edition of the Hockey Debates podcast. I'm Bob Duff, joined as always by Hall of Fame hockey writer Kevin Allen. And today our special guest is a brilliant musician and a brilliant writer, a guy who has kind of got multiple talents, Dave Bidini, well known in Canada. And I imagine, Kevin, he's growing, I would assume, in popularity in the U.S. So, Dave, you've written a lot about hockey and about hockey all over the world and played in kind of bizarre places. So it's really kind of, just bizarre world right now to be having hockey played nowhere.
Yeah, if I certainly wouldn't be able to write that book today. I wouldn't have been able to go anywhere, really. I'm glad that I went.
Oh, we lost it. Oh, there you go.
Should I tell the kids to get off the internet? That might be part of it. Yeah, it's good to have been able to have gone into the world music as well, and it just shows you, you have to really appreciate, the privilege of being able to travel and to explore other places and to not take that stuff for granted, right? Because it can be taken away from you at a moment's notice by, a lot of different circumstances.
I think we're all three of us are big hockey guys. So I think we're all looking forward to that day when we can go back into a rink, even if it's just to go back in and skate ourselves, let alone
smell it.
To smell the coldness, I guess you'd say. And,
smell the fart.
Where did that notion come from to want to, and within you, to want to go play hockey in places that you went to? Transylvania, you went to Harbin, China, Hong Kong. There's places that obviously aren't associated with hockey, maybe a little more so now than they were when you wrote the book, but still certainly not hotbeds of hockey.
I think just looking for different stories, really. I found that for a while we were kind of hearing the same 6 hockey stories over and over and over. It was just they were swapped out, different players, just different settings as well. And also, I wanted to go back to find sort of a purity of.
Issues here with our technology today. Maybe the
boys. Is that me?
Yeah, we got you back again. We can hear you, Dave.
Sorry about that.
Okay, well.
Yeah, I just was looking for different stories, and different settings, and different approaches to the way the game was played. Just getting to the real sort of essence and the heart of it, and people playing to discover the sport as opposed to locked in the same way, over and over and over, and just getting into different settings, really.
Dave, throughout my career, I had so many people come up to me and say, how lucky you've been to be able to transform your passion into a money-making endeavor. I got to believe that went doubly for you. I mean, the big passions that most young males have are sports and music, and somehow you've managed to find a writing job that incorporated both of them. I mean, do you feel like the luckiest man on the planet Earth?
Yeah, it's great to be able to, wake up every day and do something that you love. You guys know that. And I think with, music for sure in the beginning, that was always about, our band was very independent. We sort of did our own thing and had our own sound. And we were sort of fearless together in that way. So, when it came to thinking about ways that I wanted to write, I was able to sort of, feel confident going into, taking sort of a different approach. And, with both sports and music, it's delivered me to places in the world I never would have been able to get to otherwise. So I'm thrilled to have been able to, continue to do it after all these years, for sure.
Another one of your books, I mean, I'm biased. I love all your books, but another one that, really kind of struck a chord with me was The Best Game You Can Name. It was just the way you interspersed kind of your own hockey stories and your own passion for the game with stories from NHLers, from superstars to guys that just maybe had a cup of coffee, and just to see that same kind of passion and love for the game. And we hear so often, because these guys make so much money, that the love in the game isn't there anymore. I think you can really see that right now when it's been taken away from these guys. I talked to a few of the tellers today about it, and they just, to not be able to do it, especially at this time of the year when they'd be ramping up for the playoffs, it's just heartbreaking for them.
Yeah, it gets back to what Kevin said a little bit, and I think that's the sort of thing that musicians and athletes have in common. There's so many hours of your day are sort of spent not playing, really. You're on stage for 90 minutes, hour and a half, 2 hours. Hockey game takes 2.5, 3 hours. The rest of the time, you're sure you're practicing if you're on a team and you're jamming too, but it's a lot of sitting around, and you have to fill that time with stories, right? And it's a great, both of those realms are great places for storytelling. And I was happy, I felt grateful, and I was happy to honor the tradition of storytelling in hockey. And you're right, it's changed. Players are so controlled, they're micromanaged. John Brophy has that line in that book about how if a guy would walk into the dressing room with a briefcase, you used to get nervous. Now that's a common occurrence in dressing rooms, right? You've got, guys, accountants and lawyers and agents are, sitting on their laps half the time. So it's a shame, and it's remarkable, to go back and read, the stuff, from your generation of sports writing too, where there was just more of an openness, I think, in terms of what, of how players spoke, even right down to the language they used. And it's remarkable that, I was able to get a book out of it at that time, because I don't think you really could these days, certainly not from the players playing, which is not to disparage their ability or the style of game that they play, but off the ice is way more different, I think, than it's ever been.
Dave, I wanted to ask you a little bit about outdoor hockey. In the United States, now we have players coming from all over the country, but for most of the last 40 years or 50 years, we've had players coming mostly from the hockey belt, from Minnesota and, Massachusetts area, the Northeast, and from Michigan. And all of those places have outdoor hockey, and there's a fondness for it. There's some building of rinks, in the backyards, and, there's 1,000 lakes in Minnesota, and we have lakes here in Michigan where I live. But the romance is not the same. There's a fondness in America for those who grew up with some experience with outdoor hockey. But in Canada, it's a spiritual happening for them when they're happening. I wonder if you could sort of explain that for our American listeners, just the fondness that Canadians and the nostalgia they feel for in the romance of outdoor hockey.
I think, yeah, and I think that's a fading romance in a lot of ways, Kevin, because it's just not as cold as it used to be. There used to be, just you're not far from where I am in the city. It'd be pretty much a given that ice, the lakes and the rivers would be frozen from, late October to early March, and that just doesn't happen just anymore. And even some of the rinks here with natural ice in the parks and whatnot. I think we had one day in the park skating on the flooded baseball diamond. That said, Canada is still a cold country, and we did Hockey Day in Canada in Yellowknife in February, and there was no shortage of ice, of outdoor ice. Mind you, it was like minus 35, right? So you had to really gut it out, but it was beautiful. And I do think I think that your blood responds in kind of a different way when you're outdoors. There's everything about it is different. The searing winds, the cold feet, and a kind of cold that you feel like cold in the small of your back, and cold like in the back of your leg, or on your neck. I think that's the spirit of sort of Canadian sort of warrior resilience, people that, have to be out there being together, being social, despite the fact that the elements are so terrifying. and difficult, because if we didn't do that, we would just all be inside and we would have no society whatsoever. So yeah, I know it can be a beautiful thing, and that's again not just in Canada as well. You find that a lot in Scandinavia and certainly in Russia as well. I skated on there was an outdoor rink beside a church in Siberia. I went to make a film called The Hockey Moment. I go to Russia, and I frostbite on both of my big toes after skating outdoors for 6 hours. But it was nice to experience that rite of passage in a different place, in a place that wasn't Canada.
I can remember growing up in Scarborough, it would have been the Super Bowl Sunday in 1973 when the Dolphins played the Vikings. And there'd been an ice storm the night before, and it wasn't even an ice rink. It was just we had a hydro field behind where our houses were, and there was an ice storm, and there was a perfect sheet of ice to play hockey. And we got all the neighborhood kids together, and we figured, okay, let's go play hockey for a couple hours, and then we'll watch the Super Bowl, because they actually played the Super Bowl in daytime in that era. So we got out there in the morning and started playing, and we just kept playing, and by the time you knew it, it was dark. The lights were coming on, and our folks were coming to tell us to come home for dinner. And by the time we got home, the Vikings had already lost another Super Bowl. Passion just takes over, and you just play all day, and you don't think about how cold it is. You don't think about how cold you are. You're just chasing the puck and having the time of your life.
Totally. Yep. Yeah. And, I think you probably still find kids that, on the prairies that have had that kind of life. Certainly Dylan Cousins, who grew up in Whitehorse, he's a kid who would have played outdoors. But, a lot of kids from Vancouver and British Columbia, like the American South, rarely skated outdoors. Whether it's Joe Sakic or Paul Correa or, guys like that, they play, it just doesn't get cold enough out there. So I think it's specific to a kind of region in Canada, but it's, I always try to get out at least once, out on the rink and play outdoors, just to remember how that feeling, what it's like.
I can remember talking to Ted Lindsay when the Leafs were going to play the Wings at Michigan Stadium, and everybody was waxing poetic about outdoor hockey, and Ted in his way just kind of grumbled, outdoor hockey in Kirkland Lake. We dreamed of indoor hockey, because the only time you could play indoors was you made the championship when you were a kid.
That's right.
Dave, you were talking about experience in hockey and outside Canada. I had a unique experience that I know not many others have had. I know that because there was nobody there. I went and saw the under-18 World Championships when it was in Mexico City, and it was early in the infancy of that. I'm not even sure they even counted it as a U18 World Championships. I think it was the forerunner of that, but it was a long time ago, and there were probably about 9 people in the stands. It was so quiet in the rink that at one point, one of the American parents in a crucial game against Russia stood up and said, "You knuckleheads, you got too many men on the ice." And of course, the official hadn't noticed. So he heard that voice, he counted them, and then called a penalty on the Americans, and sheepishly the American parent sat down. But I wondered if you had ever seen or knew anything of hockey in Mexico, or the only thing I know about it is that Austin Matthews' grandparents on his mother's side, who speak only Spanish, watch his games on satellite television because they still live in Mexico.
Yeah, there was I think a couple of years ago, the Great Plaza. I think they iced that, or they put some sort of sheet down, and there's photos of thousands of people skating down there. But there are a few other places, Brazil, Portugal, Spain. Those were other places that I was hoping to get to at some point, but I couldn't go everywhere. So, there's those. When I was in Dubai, one of the great things about playing in Dubai is you'd play a game, and then you'd lay your equipment out, on the grounds around the arena, and your equipment would dry in like 20 seconds. That was one of the great things, about playing in the intense heat. And listen, those rinks were built by sheikhs too, right? They were Cadillacs in terms of their refrigeration system, and they would have to be too. But the ice was always really cold, and the rinks were great. But it's hockey's played like it is. You look at those World Championship brackets, like the B, C, and D brackets. It's astonishing, how many countries play the game. My friend Stephen Heighton, who's a novelist and a poet in Toronto, he wanted to try out for the Greek national team that has since disbanded, and he never got a chance to write the book. But we came up with the perfect title. It was going to be called Hubris Night in Canada. He had the great title anyways, but he never ended up writing the book.
I did play hockey with a guy who was approached. His last name was Hernandez, and he was approached by a scout for the Mexican national team who was up in Canada looking around trying to find players, and they saw his last name and they thought, hey, maybe this guy can play.
That sounds like a prank that someone came up and attacked. It's Saskatchewan somewhere.
Before we let you go, Dave, I want to ask you about the West End Phoenix. Now, Kevin and I have both been put out to pasture in our newspaper careers, and here you are creating a newspaper and putting it out there for the public to read. It kind of reminds me of the story in Monty Python and the Holy Grail of the guy who kept building the castle on the swamp, and finally one's made up. And it's certainly a bold venture to put a newspaper out today in this market. What made you want to do it, and tell people how they can access the West End Phoenix if they're interested?
We have, we have the lane to ourselves. That's for sure. There aren't people falling over themselves to start print newspapers. But one of the reasons we did it was because everybody else is running in the other direction. Writing their blogs and their websites and stuff, and all of that's perfectly fine. And I've done that too. But there were a lot of very strong community newspapers in the West End of Toronto and in the city of Toronto. They all were bought by Metroland, and the content was gouged out of them. They're glorified flyers now, but they were quite popular. So we knew that there was an audience here still. And before we published the paper, I went door to door and sold about 800 subscriptions just on the promise of a paper. And so I knew there was an appetite. And it's a very, it's a dense part of the city where we are. People that love to go to the theater, people that love to support great music in our neighborhood, and so I knew that kind of if we did the paper kind of the right way, if it was kind of we get a chance to reinvent the community newspaper a little bit. If it's a little bit more tilts a bit more towards literature and sort of more of an artist's view of politics and all the other issues in our neighborhood, we thought we could find our audience. In fact, we have our sports issue is coming up. It's out in a couple of weeks, and we're going to deliver it in spite of the fact that everybody's working remotely, but our printing press is still working. But Damien Cox has a call. It's our sports issue. So Damien's writing a column for us, and Morgan Campbell, another Toronto Star writer. In fact, I think we have 3 former Toronto Star writers writing for us, because people are, the writers are available to us because there's not that many people working in the industry anymore. So we're fortunate to have those people at our disposal. And just go to westendphoenix.com. We mail 400 copies across Canada and in other places of the world, and we deliver in the West End of Toronto. So yeah, just go to that website and you can click on, and there's a bunch of stories from each issue that are on the site, so you can get a sense of what we do. But it's fun. We're making a go of it. We're in our 3rd year, so far so good.
Well, I applaud your perseverance, and as 2 old newspaper guys, we admire your courage as well. And I want to thank you for joining us today, Dave. If anybody out there hasn't read any of Dave's books, you should definitely make an appointment reading their excellent works. Again, I say I'm biased, but I love every one of them. And thanks very much for your time today, Dave, and really appreciate it. And we'll look forward to talking to you again.
Nice to meet you 2 legends this way, and hopefully it's not the last time.
I hope
Thanks,
so.
Dave.
Have a great job. Thanks very much. All right, Kevin, a week ago, not even a week ago, it was Thursday, we sat here, and I think we both were kind of optimistic that there would be hockey again this year, that the NHL would play. And I wouldn't say a 180, but I'm kind of realistically optimistic now, I would say, if that's such a terminology. The more I look at it, the more I think it's just less and less likely that it's going to happen.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've always, kind of been someone who, when someone says they're undecided, I go, really? Like most people have an opinion, like one way or the other about certain things. But in this case, I really am like in the undecided camp. Like I vacillate back and forth. Like I think, well, yeah, sure, we can figure it out. We can figure out an 11-day training camp, even if it's in August, and then we could play a tournament in September and I, or August and September. And then, I start to think, well, but, we can't just announce one day that, there's never going to be a time and during this pandemic when we're going to wake up on Tuesday and there's going to be no new cases. Like this is going to be a gradual slowing. So, we're going to have to, at some point, even if we declare it's business as usual, the store's open, go back to work and live your lives accordingly, there's still going to be people that are sick. And there's going to still be people who are going to get this. And I think it's going to be really difficult for us to just go about our lives again. Maybe for younger people, but for the older generation, I think this is going to be hard. And I've heard people compare it to 9/11, but I think this is completely different. I think people were ready to go back and do things after 9/11 because it was an enemy that we can identify with. We could all tell ourselves, well, we'll be more vigilant. See something, say something. Keep your eyes open. Don't let them, terrorists attack on North American soil again. But this is different. Like, are we going to be willing as citizens to enter a movie theater or a church or a restaurant and set shoulder to shoulder with people, right away after this happened? I think not. Like, I think we're going to have trouble, filling up. I think people will be happy to sit and watch sports on television, but I'm a little fearful that it's not going to be business as usual, and it'll take some time for us to get used to this idea. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I remember people saying in 9/11, if we don't go back to our normal lives, if we don't go out for dinner, if we don't do the things we normally do, then the terrorists win. Well, if you do the things you normally do too soon with this virus, the virus is going to win, and it's going to win in a rout because we're going to just get everybody sick. I've heard numbers yesterday. I heard a disease expert talking about if we weren't doing this social distancing, they would have predicted 60% of us would have got the virus. Now they say it's likely less than 20% will get it. So, that's why we're doing this. And, to rush back, if people are going to be anxious, like we both want to see hockey again because that would mean normalcy was coming back to our lives as much as anything. And I just think that normalcy is a long way off.
Yeah. Yeah, I just don't know. I mean, it'll take some conviction, gumption, for the commissioners of these leagues to open up and say, okay, I mean, let's just, this is not our sport, obviously, but let's just talk about football, the giant petri dish that is, institutional football, where, there's in the NFL more than 60 players crammed in to small dressing rooms and, and big stadiums. And in that environment where there's lots of scrapes and cuts and things where and contact on every play. I mean, if you ever seen a slow motion film of a hockey hit where the guy's checks and it shows the stuff that just comes out of people's mouths, like it's really gross. And that's we're just an environment where you could see why athletes are going to pass this on. I mean, everyone in the hockey world understands this, and the NBA as well, because every winter both leagues are overrun by flu. because the competitive environment is a perfect breeding ground for flu to be passed along, because you're in close contact. Just think of the NBA and the leaning of the bodies against each other and so forth. And football is going to be the same way. Like they have physical contact on every play. Like you can play a shift in the NHL and sometimes not touch anybody. It'll make your coach mad, but you can play that shift sometimes. But that's certainly not true in football, where you're going to touch somebody on every play. So I don't know. I think we're all going to have to, and we've never been down this road before, so we have no history on which to draw. So I think someone will have to make the decision to play again, but I think we'll have reluctance for people to come back and watch. I think we'll have, I think athletes will come back, but I think some of them will have trepidation about it, to be sure.
And wasn't it Jerry Glanville who used to call the big hits snot knockers?
Yeah.
And you talk about the NHL where they get the best of everything and first class hotels, and then you look at junior hockey or even minor pro hockey. I mean, they're riding on buses. They're not staying in the 5-star hotels. They're staying, and I can remember working in Western Canada and going on. That's a league that's spread over several provinces and U.S. states. So you would make one swing through the other division every year, and you would play like 7 games in 10 days, and you just truck on that bus from one city to the next one, and it was just an incubator for viruses. And by the end of that trip, the whole team would be sick. They'd be lucky to have enough players to suit up for a game by the end of the trip. So if anybody came back from their West Coast swing with even a 500 record, it was a miracle, because by halfway through, your team was just devastated, either through illness or injury.
Yeah. No, it's going to be fascinating to sort of watch how this, unfolds. And, like we're all sort of maintaining this 6-foot, ring around us, but that's just a generalized thing. It's not like we're dropping the Maxwell Get Smart cone of silence over us, to sort of keep people away. And, is it 6 feet, or is it 8 feet, or is it 9 feet, or is it 4 feet? I mean, we don't really know. And, we know it's passed on best or most easily through, droplets when you sneeze or cough and so forth. But, what if, if you're taking your walk now, we should be more physically fit, because everyone I know is taking daily walks just because they're going stir crazy in the house. But, everybody tries to get out of the way. But, when there's no one around, if the guy that just passed there, a minute before, if he sneezed, I mean, is there stuff still floating in the air? Like I'm not an epidemiologist, so I have no idea knowing, but, who knows? So I think with all that's percolating out there for us to think about, I just wonder how easy it's going to be for everyone to slide back into our normal fandom. I think we're going to be excited and want to see, sports. Like we sure miss it now. It's one of the catch-22s of all time. We finally have the time to watch and to do the things that we wanted to do, but we can't do them. So, we got the time, but they don't exist.
Did you ever think you'd see life where the most terrifying thing you did in a day was to go get your groceries? I was in the grocery store last Friday, and I was playing on special teams. My head was on a swivel. I'm looking for people coming from all directions. I was getting my milk out of the freezer, and a guy reached in beside me, and I'm like, buddy, back off.
Well, yeah, that's funny, but I just was saying the same thing. The first time I really have taken this seriously. What are we, day 19 of Without Hockey? But I've only been to Kroger a couple of times, and I went the first time, and it was the first day of us all being sequestered, and you're sheltering in place. And boy, everybody was so polite. Like one person in the freezer at a time. X's on the ground to make sure that we don't put our carts too close to one another. plenty of hand sanitizer to clean off your carts. So I went to Kroger yesterday, and there was 0 hand sanitizer. It's all gone. You know, we're not wiping off any carts anymore. So now you got to make a mental note to basically dip your arms and hands in hand sanitizer when you get home. But, you know, you're filling up your cart. And I would say 80% of the folks were still being mindful of just the scenarios that you were just describing. You know, you got your head in the frozen food trying to find, you know, peas instead of corn, that you wait. And instead of having someone else just come up, put their cart right next to you and just move you aside and say, look, I just want to get those green beans right there. You know, I mean, that's just, you know, what pretty much that's kind of stuff that was going on when I was there. And so, yeah, and you know, you're just telling yourself, well, this is it. This is when I'm going to get it. You know, it's this guy who wants to get these green beans who's going to give me, you know, the virus. And, you know, and then you're saying to yourself, was it worth it? You know, it's like the biggest study in probability ever. Like, I was thinking about this today. If we just could stay in our houses right now, I would say, and you were secluded and you saw no people, I would say you have a 0 chance of contracting that. You know, where are you going to get it from? It's not coming in through your air ducts. So you got 0 chance. Well, every time you go out now, or you see one person, or you go through a drive-in, or you pump gas, each time you do that, you're increasing your odds of contracting it. So it's really on us. It's on us to avoid you know, contact. So, you know, in athletics, we talk all the time about, you know, you want to control the things you can control. And, you know, when it's the ball's in your court, if you win out, you can get in the playoffs. Well, you can make the playoffs here and not get this if, you know, you just control your environment, which you're capable of doing.
Yeah, I mean, I've got some banking I have to do, and I know I've got some other checks coming, and I'm kind of waiting till I've got everything together, so I only have to make one trip, you know, to reduce my odds of becoming infected. Rather than, you know, in normal life, you get a check, you run to the bank, put it in the bank.
Yeah. See, I look at it as cost analysis. Like, is it worth the risk of getting a virus to go to the bank? I say no. I'm not going to the bank. You know, I'll wait till this is done to put those checks in. So, you know, you have to get food. So, you know, you're going to have to just go out and do that. But, you know, there's so many things that I think people are doing that you don't have to do.
Yeah. And unfortunately, what we have to do now is say goodbye because we've run out of time yet again. I'm Bob Duff, Kevin Allen, who joins me every week on this Hockey Debates podcast. We'll be back on the air Thursday. And if you're listening live, thanks. And if you're listening later on when you had some time, we appreciate that too. And we'll see you on Thursday.